Let's talk a little bit about CVE Record Hygiene. For all of the CNAs out there, maybe you've been a CNA for 10 years and you've got records you created 10 years ago, and you're wondering, can I, should I, am I allowed to go back and edit these things? And we've had a few different rules about, you should, you shouldn't, you don't touch this part, make sure you copy that part. And I'm going to try and bring you up to date with where we are right now. As always, the CVE program is in a little bit of transition. And so I'll bring up those gotchas, things that we're still watching out for as we transition. For example, from the legacy search to the new search capability, and how that affects you and maintaining your records. Okay, and feel free to type in the Q&A, and somebody on the panelist team, let me know if a question comes up and I can't see it, please. So let's see. Today's CVE record. On the left side of the screen, I've got a screenshot of, you go to CVE.org, you type in a CVE ID. I happen to use 2022-41139, and you might see that that is for a product MITRE called Dara. If you haven't used it, it's a great tool. The Caldera team created this automation of red teaming so that whether you're a college red team or you're a large enterprise organization and you want a red team against your own blue team and test stuff, Caldera is a great tool. But like any piece of software, it has vulnerabilities. So here's a CVE on MITRE Caldera. You can see two containers. The big heavy blue bar at the top, CNA MITRE Corporation, that's the CNA container for that record. And below it, CVE program, that's the program container. This is relatively new, didn't exist a few months ago. And the purpose at this point of the CVE container is to manage historical externally added references. As a CNA, when you create a CVE record, you own your CNA container, you own the stuff in there. And up till recently, we asked you, we've been putting additional references in there. The secretariat, the program, has been putting some additional references in your CNA container. We're moving those. We're putting them in the CVE program container. Now you as a CNA can clean up your record. And we'll talk about how you might do that. So that's one use case for cleaning up records. And here I wanted to drive home that there are two containers and they're required. So if I'm a vendor of a scanning tool or something, and I'm pulling down the CVE list and I'm parsing these records in order to scan for things, I do need to pull two containers, to parse two containers, at least these two. Other containers are somewhat optional, and we'll talk about that in just a sec. Let's look at the right side of the screen. If I clicked on JSON view, the right side would pop up, and we see the CNA container in JSON there and the CVE program container. In this case, it's the format of the container is called an ADP, because the ADP partners in our program also use the same type of container. But for this specific program container, it'll contain references. And you might see on the left at the bottom in a red circle, or on the right in the blue square, the tag transferred. And that means that reference was in the CNA container. It's actually still there in this example. It's a duplicate. But if you as a CNA wanted to remove it from your container, if you had a valid reference in your container and you did not want this other one in there, it's in the CVE program container and you could clean it up. If you have questions about that, please put them in the Q&A or ask us later by email. Or if you have a root that's not the MITRE root, talk to your root, because they should be helping to answer your questions with those as well. So let's take a look at a different record. In this case, yes, the CNA is MITRE, but it's a different product, not a MITRE product, and somebody's added info. On the left side of my screen, you see the record and you see authorized data publisher down there at the bottom of the record, and it says CISA-ADP. Those ADPs, those authorized data publishers, add additional data. In this case, SSVC, CWE, CVSS, etc. So if we clicked on that and expanded that, we would see the right side of the screen, Note that a CNA does not control this info. There's no way for a CNA to edit the ADP info. But, and this may have come up earlier in the talks, it probably will come up tomorrow. If, for example, the CISA ADP added a CVSS score to your record, your CNA record, and you don't like it, you don't agree with it, or just because you did not have a CVSS score in your first iteration of your record, but you're planning to have one, when you update your record and add a CVSS score, later the ADP may say, oh, you know, now that the CNA has added the score, we don't have to have ours in there. They may delete it. I think that is their operating rule at the moment. Art Mannion or somebody else who can represent, feel free to type in the chat whether or not I'm getting it right. And I can't see the chat right now, so feel free to jump on verbally if you want. So that ADP container is not editable by the CNA. CNAs do control all the data in your own container, and you can add to it anytime. You can add scores, you can add additional detail or references, and that's what we encourage you to do. By adding a CVSS score or a CWE or a CPE, that's adding additional enhanced data, and we are monitoring that right now as we encourage this move to adding additional data. We want CVE to be a great gold source for CVSS scores, CWE weaknesses, etc., that the vendor or original assigning CNA provides when they publish their record. And if you're doing that consistently, we're going to add you to the recognition list. So in the bottom left on this slide, you see a link, CVE.org, and our news items. Every couple of weeks, we update what the CNAs are doing, those CNAs that are consistently adding these additional data pieces. So if you participate in that, you'll get added to that list. Sort of a attaboy. Thank you for doing that. It's very important to all our end users out there. Let me know if there's any questions in the chat. Just holler out and I'll stop. So where are the guidelines for what you should or can do with managing your records? They're on CVE.org in the resources. It's the CVE Record Management Guidelines. And really the intent is to protect the integrity of the CVE record. We want to make sure that we're providing the end user, the general public, the enterprise operator out there with the best information about vulnerabilities that we can. So when you're editing a record, when you're updating it, don't remove important information. You need to keep the changes limited to correcting stuff that's wrong or providing better information to help people figure out how to patch or how to ameliorate a problem, to do protection. That's the purpose. When updating your CVE descriptions, you can add additional detail. That's great. You can fix an error, but don't remove information that's not wrong, right? We want to keep that historically relevant information. And definitely, we do not want to hide anything. That's not the purpose of CVE. So downplaying the severity of a vulnerability, that's totally not allowed. And somebody's going to catch you and tell us about it. So just don't do it. Now, also about the description, at the moment, it was mentioned in an earlier talk that we still have to support our legacy search on cve.mitre.org, and to do that, we down convert some records, and so we're limited to characters of 3,999. The schema says that you can have a slightly bigger description field, and when we retire that legacy site, we'll open it up a few more characters. But at the moment, please make sure your descriptions aren't too long, or they sort of break our back end system a little bit. Also, the guidance, the record management guide says preserving references is important. Well, with the new CVE program container, this part of the guidance is no longer applicable. You can edit those references as a CNA inside of your container because the CVE program has its own container now. So that's great news. Okay. So why would you want to update your CVE records? Well, and I pulled this right from the rules. You can add additional data. You can say, hey, we now have a patch for this. You can add that information. You can put in your enhanced data. Hey, we figured out a good score we want to apply, or we've learned that this a new weakness is covered by this. We'll add a CWE ID. All of that is great. Maybe references are changed. Maybe your corporation had a merger or a rename, and you need to update your references so they stay current and active. Those are wonderful things to change in your records. Over time, if a record was created years ago and society has changed, there might be a reason to redo the record to address new paradigms, to use a horrible cliche word. So what does this mean? What's an example of a socio-technical change? For example, originally the vulnerability was about maybe a product that used some encryption, and three different types of encryption were fine, but one encryption was too weak. And so the record was about that one weak encryption. And over time, other types of encryption also became too weak. And so you need to update it and say, now these older types of encryptions that were fine are no longer fine. That might be an example. Product status changes, or hey, maybe there's a reference in there that now somebody took over that domain, and that reference is now actually evil or malicious. You want to get that out of there. So those are all wonderful reasons to update a record. Or if records need to be split, merged, or you're rejecting, like for duplicates, feel free to do those. Disputed records, when a CNA is working with somebody and a record is disputed, you might add the disputed tag. Let us know if you have questions, or let your root know if you have questions about how to do that. You can do all these with some of the tools that are out there. All of this is on our website. The CVE Services page tells you about how to use services and these wonderful tools that are created by the community. Each of these tools has readmes on GitHub about how to use them. They're not managed or supported by the CVE program, but we love them, and we want you to experiment with them and see if they meet your use case for your organization. You could also, for example, hit our API directly and use Postman or curl, do things command line, or write your own client. And if you do that, you'll be part of that wonderful group in our community that has developed tools, and you can bring those back to us to share with the community. Go to the working groups like the AWG, the QWG. Let them know you have a script or a tool that you're developing for your CVE management use case. We would be happy once those working groups kind of look at your tool and say, yes, this brings value. We would be happy to list it on our services page under those clients and tools. And we fully encourage innovation from the community. We really need the community to help us by creating and maintaining these. Now, if you have any concerns or suggestions about these specific tools, reach out to their maintainers directly, or bring it up in discussion in the working groups. Great opportunity for interfacing with other technical folks from other CNAs in the working groups like the AWG. Anybody see any questions for me in the chat? Is anybody still left on the call?
Still left on the call. Want to make one addition to your references. Cleanup. Sure. It's important when you, as a CNA, specify assign a CVE. There are three required elements, and the required elements are the ID, the description, and a reference. Still exists today as from the very beginning. Those are the minimal required elements. So if you're going to go in and clean up references, make sure that you keep a reference to what should have been the original reference from your perspective, or if there's a more current one, please make sure that that more current one is in the CNA container. As was mentioned earlier, everything else has been moved to the CVE program container. So we will, in essence, be cleaning up the correct way and having the initial assigned kind of reference that your organization feels is appropriate in your container. Just wanted to make sure that that was clear. We don't want them just to, wipe out all references out of the CNA container. We do need the one that they believe is the most relevant and current.
That's exactly right. And thanks for that emphasis, Kent. Any other questions that anybody has or sees in the chat?
Yeah, I was going to say that somebody threw one in the Q&A, George Masters. He says, is that API entirely public or any authorization required?
For the CVE Services API in the middle of this slide, that takes you to actually what is a Swagger document for our API. And if you look at that document, you can get there from the CVE Services page on cve.org. If you look at that API, there's a couple of endpoints that are open to the general public. A general public non-CNA with no credentials could do a couple of very simple things. They could basically enter a CVE ID and see whether it's reserved, or if it's got a record, they could see the record. And that's about it. All of the other endpoints are either for CNAs or only for the Secretariat. Great question.
Lisa's hand up too. Lisa, go over to you.
And maybe I missed it, Dave, but did you mention that CNAs aren't supposed to change their records before October 2016?
I did not, because none of us are that old. I'm sorry. You're right. You're right, Lisa. So up until 2016, all of the records were created by one source, basically the MITRE that was running the program, and then federation happened. And we love it because CNAs are now doing the work for us. It's terrific. We're able to grow that way. But as Lisa points out, records created back before 2016, those are not to be edited. So since then, records that you own as a CNA, those are ones you can edit. Thanks, Lisa.
And just one more plug for you guys. If you're going to change, if you have thousands of records and you're going to change them all, one fell swoop, you might notify the Secretariat to let them know so they can keep an eye on the system so nothing goes sideways.
Absolutely. I should have put that in this talk. Thanks for bringing that up. Don't break our system. If you're going to update more than, let's say, 50 records at once, please reach out to us so we can coordinate so that we figure out a timing so you can batch those records and not bog down or lock up the system. Great point, Lisa. Thanks.
I update 50 records at a time all the time and never talk to you. So I think the number is higher. And so,
okay.
But I know it has happened that with CNA has updated like 1,000 at one time, and that did break the system.
That's right.
That did happen once. So it's a good practice. If you're worried about it, please do reach out. Yep. Yeah.
And a plug for using the test system, test.cve.org. When you use our test API, then you can check your records on test.cve.org. Do that before doing production, whatever you're doing. Thanks. Great points. Anything else? Any questions in chat? Right on. I'm going to stop sharing.